Welcome to the Real Pros of DC. Each week we interview some of the DC metro area's top professionals and discuss topics related to this unique real estate market. I'm your host, William McCoy, and this is the Real Pros of DC. Welcome to the Real Pros of DC, where we talk to some of the top real estate professionals in the area. My name is William McCoy. I'm your host. We have on our co-hosts, Taylor, Paul, and Alicia. And we have the extraordinary Marty Stanton today with us from KVS Title. How you doing today, Marty?
Doing great, Will.
Good.
Thanks for having me on the show. Really
Absolutely.
Appreciate it, everybody.
Well, tell us a little bit about KVS Title and how you guys got started.
Oh, sure. My partners, David Canstrom and Claudia Vitale, and I started KVS almost 9 years ago. This May it will be 9 years. We had all been in the industry for a really long time, the better part of 25, almost 30 years.
Awesome.
A little scary.
Seasoned.
That's right. We've seen a transaction or two. But essentially, we decided to come together and do it our way. We were all approaching 40-something, and we said, we learned from the best in the industry, and we said, you know what, it's time to do this our way. So we started KVS.
Awesome. Well, we've heard a lot about the TOPA, and it's scary because, I mean, I've heard that owners were getting extorted and all deals were going right to the table and things were like happening and falling to pieces. I mean, like that seems really crazy to me that this law was able to affect so many people this way. I mean, wow.
Yeah, and with that, I mean, TOPA is a huge thing right now, which is why we wanted you on the show. You're a wealth of knowledge. So before we get into all the specifics about TOPA, can you just give us and our listeners and our watchers, what is TOPA? Give us an overview, and what does it mean for our buyers and sellers out there?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So TOPA is the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. It actually was a law that was put in place because there was a lot of displacement of tenants back in the 70s. And so TOPA actually was passed in 1980 to prevent tenants in the city from being displaced. And it was applied to all housing types across the city. So it didn't matter if it was a commercial building, 5 or more units, or if it was residential, single family, or 1 to 4, all of the regulations applied to all housing types. And it was essentially, how does it affect buyers and sellers? Really with the city changing over time, and really in the last 10 years, there was this, in the single family space in particular, where tenants are not obligated to organize and have legal counsel as they are in the commercial space. Tenants were able to extort money when a seller was going to sell. And a seller may have already been under a contract with the buyer, but that tenant has the right to buy, and the tenant has the right to assign their TOPA rights to someone else for whatever the market would bear.
A lot of loopholes for, I mean, is that a loophole a good word for, or just a safety net for tenants?
It's a great way to think about it, because I think we all would think of it as a loophole, but it actually is what the law was. So there was lots of representation. Attorneys out there in the marketplace saw this as an opportunity to represent tenants in order to have them get a buyout of their TOPA rights. And so essentially everything that was being done was legal. It just didn't feel right that someone had to pay essentially a large sum of money in order to sell their property. And I think that that essentially is why Councilmember Bonds and her staff felt like it was time to get together and really focus on modernizing TOPA in a way where we were going to deal with it differently.
So Marty, this journey, I'm sure, wasn't a walk in the park at all. Are there any stories or any specific complications that you can tell us that occurred during the process?
Wow. Well, I think that's probably going to take much longer than this segment. But I will say this. We started this process more than 5 years ago. So I was a member of DCAR, which is the District of Columbia Association of Realtors, TOPA Task Force. So we essentially got together 5 years ago and decided we want to make a change in TOPA. We actually looked at it in making a change in the commercial space, in the residential, and also just the single family space. We actually had 3 bills, and we have a legislative day once a year in November, and we were beating this drum. It was part of our legislative agenda. When the news story broke about the extortion that was happening specifically in the single-family space, and you might remember Council Member Anita Bonds was actually interviewed, and she said at that time that this was not the intention of TOPA, was for tenants to have these large payouts. And so going to the process, now getting to your question, we got together with the group of tenant advocates and the group protecting elderly advocates like, AARP. And we got to a working group that summer. And there were lots of, it started with us educating each other. And then after that, probably if I was going to get to the final piece that was so difficult, it was the idea of defining consideration. We felt very strongly that you needed to limit consideration because otherwise you were going to continue to have the extortion. And then we also felt at the same time the large tenant, the tenant and the elderly advocates were concerned that if we did do that, what would that do to TOPA in the commercial space? What would that do to TOPA in other places? And we were just focused on the single family space. So it was sort of the hill that we were both not willing to give any. And that ultimately, because we couldn't come to an agreement, that led to the hearing with the council, which then took the turn in a different direction. And there being the idea of a single family exemption, really, it was the birth of the single family exemption.
Well, you had mentioned tenants like selling their rights. How does that work exactly? Like if you're the tenant, can you then give those rights to somebody else?
Sure. Essentially what TOPA does, what the law allows, is the tenant to have the right to buy. So a seller could essentially give that tenant the opportunity to purchase, use Form B, okay, without a third-party contract, or they can go to the market and get a third-party contract using Form A and then give the tenant the opportunity to buy. So the tenant has the right to purchase, but then they also have the right to assign that right to purchase to anyone else out there in the marketplace. And so this was the creation of, and I think it was fueled by technology, fueled by DC as a growing market, that there was an opportunity, and certainly educating tenants to say, you have these rights and they're could be very lucrative to you. That created this industry that allowed them to assign it and get very large payouts.
So speaking, since this whole TOPA rewrite really surrounds the single family households, explain to us what these ADUs are, because I know a lot of our clients and realtors alike really want to understand.
So this class of property essentially, and for what most real estate professionals and buyers and sellers in our marketplace should understand, is that probably 98 to 99% of the properties that they deal with, that they're involved with, day in and day out are going to be exempt. So just to be clear, single family properties, row houses, both with or without an accessory dwelling unit, any condo, co-op, or a property that's part of a homeowners association is going to meet the new exemption. There are some situations where you're going to have properties that may meet it, may not. Some questions that have come up is 2-unit properties. Certain properties that have a C of O in the basement, they still may meet the exemption because that basement C of O may still essentially meet the definition of a single family. Underwriters, most title insurers are looking at that on a case-by-case basis. But if you have a true duplex 2-unit, or if you have 3, 4, or 5 or more, the TOPA as we knew it is still the law, and you need to apply with that. The new law applies to the single-family properties that I just mentioned.
It's amazing, Marty. Well, we want to thank you so much. I mean, you're a wealth of knowledge. We'd love to have you back on the show again to answer other questions. Tell people how to get in touch with you guys and what makes KVS a differentiator in the market.
Oh, thanks. Well, first, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Seriously.
I think this is a fantastic forum, and we just appreciate you giving us an opportunity to be a part of it. So KVS, way to get in touch with us. You can reach us by phone at 301-605-1420.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You can also, our website's www.kvstitle.com.
Okay.
And we operate in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. We have offices in great locations, 6 around the city, and we have staff and everyone that's just ready to give you really an enhanced experience when you buy or when you sell a property in all 3 jurisdictions.
We want to thank Marty for being here as a special guest from KVS Title. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Marty.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Real Pros of DC. Have a real estate topic you would like us to discuss? Go to www.therealprosofdc.com and submit your idea and see footage of the show. See you next time.